Thanks for joining us. The Russia investigation heats up. Vladimir Putin has denied any involvement in election meddling. The Senate has rejected Mike Flynn's offer to testify in exchange for immunity. And now the White House is doing damage control. The president going on a Twitter rant this morning accusing quote-unquote fake news of pushing the phony Russia story, not wanting to talk about what he calls the Obama surveillance scandal. While Senator Lindsey Graham back home in South Carolina talking Russia and health care on this Saturday. Thanks for being with us. We're going to start the hour looking ahead to Monday. That's when the Russia investigation ramps up in the Senate, the White House trying to change the subject. Next week, the Senate Intelligence Committee could start privately interviewing up to 20 key individuals in their Russia probe, different from what's happening across the way in the House. Now, after these interviews, the committee chairs say they may schedule more, including public hearings. Friday, the Senate rejected former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn's offer to testify in exchange for immunity. Two congressional sources telling NBC News that piece of information. Meanwhile, the president played misdirection today, if you will. He called the Russian investigation phony, attacking the media again. Vice President Mike Pence ignored the Russia story when he was on the road in Ohio. He was back on the issue of the economy, speaking to business leaders in Ohio. All that on the heels of reports that 3 White House officials helped House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes to view classified intelligence documents related to incidental surveillance of Trump associates without giving the information to anyone else. Nunes responded to that report. Take a listen.
Yeah, I mean, you understand we're not going to get into sources and methods. I mean, it's if not, who's going to ever come to our committee? But I can tell you that those reports are mostly wrong.
And the top Democrat on the committee, Adam Schiff, finally saw the same documents Friday. He says there was no reason, though, for Nunes to receive the information instead of the entire committee. Adding to the political intrigue, no doubt. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is at the White House following those developments. Kelly.
Good afternoon, Richard. Well, we've seen Vice President Mike Pence out on the road today talking about jobs and health care and ideas the Trump administration wants to push. It was the president today who used his Twitter feed to again bring up the subject of Russia, a subject that he says is fake news, and he is clearly upset about the investigations that relate to Russian connections and possible ties to associates of Donald Trump. He says that the real story should be surveillance that may have ensnared members of his team. No evidence for that yet, but the president using the power of his Twitter feed and his 27 million followers to try to steer the conversation in another direction. Of course, there are real investigations happening about the Russian connections from the FBI and the committees on Capitol Hill. And this coming week, there will be some behind closed doors interviews done by the Senate Intelligence Committee. They've identified 20 individuals they want to meet with, talk to, try to get information to help them piece together their investigation. Very early stages here. We've also seen that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has floated the idea of immunity. So far, no takers, but aides to those committees and those involved in the process say it's just too early to be talking about immunity, but that subject may come up again down the line. Richard?
Kelly, thank you so much for that. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. And joining me now is NBC senior political editor Beth Fooey. And Beth, we heard there from Kelly what is happening, really two things that the White House does not want to hear necessarily any sort of piece of information that may make this story any deeper or longer than it already looks, that it appears to be. What do you make of what's coming up in this week for the Senate Intelligence Committee?
Yeah, the Senate Committee seems to be the place where things are actually moving along pretty well. And we know basically, because we were told by Senators Warner and Burr last week, that they would begin interviews. These are not going to be on TV. There's going to be private interviews with people that they think might have some connection to this story. We know that several people in Trump's White House have said they would voluntarily submit to an interview. Those include Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman, Carter Page, Page, a one-time foreign policy advisor. We've also heard that, and the two senators told us last week that they will speak to Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who we learned had some connection and set up meetings with the Russian ambassador and with the head of a Russian bank during the transition. Now, all three of those people have said that they will go ahead and testify, and so the Senate folks are going to decide whether it's when and whether to do that. It seems a much more sort of steady, reasoned, not exciting phase of the investigation compared to the House side, where everything just appears to be, melting down and falling apart because of the personalities, because Devin Nunes has become so red hot, and because there's real incredible distrust between the two chairs of that committee, Adam Schiff and now Devin Nunes, because of what went down with Nunes going down to the White House without informing his colleague and all of the events that took place then.
We're on the outside wondering what's going to be said in these private meetings and these questions, some very key individuals that you brought up there. Will we ever understand what is being spoken about during these particular discussions that are in private?
Well, who knows? I mean, we've got a number of investigations going on. We've got the Senate, we've got the House, which,
but the Senate specifically,
Well, I mean, they seem to be adopting the rule of, we will tell you what we need to tell you, but we want to tell you as much as we can. Right. That's what they committed to doing in that press conference last week, where they really sort of struck this tone of, don't worry, folks, we've got it under control here. We're going through the steps that we need to get to the bottom of this. They insisted it was bipartisan. They insisted that they were taking it very seriously. They committed 7 staff members to this investigation, which is quite a number, and that they were going to see it through to its logical conclusion. Now, look, it is the Intelligence Committee. They don't have a whole lot of open meetings anyway, so we can't expect that everything that they're doing, or even maybe a portion of it, is going to be out in the open. But they did commit to keeping voters aware of what they're finding out.
Always great reporting, Beth. Thank you so much. Beth Fouhy with us, Senior Political Director here, Editor here to MSNBC. Joining us now is Congressman Dan Kildee, Democrat of Michigan, member of the House Financial Services Committee. Representative, thanks for being with us right now. As you heard from Beth as well as from Kelly, as we understand what's happening on the Hill in this coming week. With Nunes in a quagmire, it appears, the House investigation on Russia seems to be a non-starter, at least by what we see in terms of day-by-day headlines that we're reporting on here. Some have shifted their faith now to the other side, to the Senate's investigation. Have you?
Well, certainly their investigation is far more legitimate. The odd behavior of Chairman Nunes is something that has really disqualified him and unfortunately taken the House Intelligence Committee really out of the conversation, out of the legitimate conversation about what needs to be investigated. It's my view, though, that we should take this out of Congress itself and have an independent, bipartisan commission, not unlike the 9/11 Commission, that has subpoena authority, that can call witnesses, that can subpoena documents, and that can produce a complete and thorough report on what took place with the Russians, what their participation was in the election, whether or not there was any connection to the Trump campaign, and give the Congress and the American people and the administration, for that matter, a complete report so that we can take steps accordingly and take this out of the Washington political environment and let Congress and the executive branch get back to doing the things that we ought to be focusing on.
And Representative, you've got a lot of folks on your side in terms of that approach that you've just described. Somebody on the other side, if you will, conservative talk show host and MSNBC contributor Hugh Hewitt, saying what you're saying, but he did say, the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, and you know about this, Adam Schiff, that he's potentially here over-focusing on process and not the issue at hand, Russia, which is what you just said. Would you say that about your fellow Democrat?
Well, I mean, process is very important here, particularly when there have been long-standing procedures and understandings that the House Intelligence Committee would function in a nonpartisan way. That process has been broken. So I appreciate what Congressman Schiff is attempting to do, and that's to get the committee back to operating the way it ought to. They broke the process, and that is what I think has made Mr. Nunes a less legitimate player in all of this. But I still believe that taking it out of Congress and taking it to a bipartisan external commission is the better path.
Agree or disagree on this, the reported request of NSA Director Mike Flynn asking for immunity when we talk about the Senate investigation ongoing? Agree Disagree with that he was denied?
Well, at this point, it makes no sense for them to prejudge who they might grant immunity to in return for for testimony.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little ironic to hear Mr. Flynn seek immunity when he characterized immunity as something that generally is an indication that somebody might be guilty. I don't believe that, but that's certainly his position.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit ironic that he would be seeking immunity. Is that some admission of guilt? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it's far too early for the Senate or anyone else to be granting immunity until they have a better sense of the full scope of what's taking place.
Yeah,
one would assume that immunity would only be granted if he is willing to testify or provide information against others above him.
It's interesting you say that, Representative. Chris Matthews was saying what goes around comes around because he had said that and now is in that very situation. As we look forward to potentially the next opportunity for members like you in Congress to move forward on some piece of legislation led by the Republicans here, ACHA obviously dead at the moment. There's a tax and infrastructure plan that could come out in the coming weeks. You're watching for that. If the White House, if Speaker Paul Ryan reaches out across the aisle on a compromise bill or compromise elements of the bill, are you initially open to working with them so that something does get passed because they're having difficulties with certain subsegments of their caucus?
Well, they first have to come to some conclusions about what they believe, and then they can engage with us on improvements to the healthcare system in this country. There's no question that even among Democrats, we acknowledge that there will be a need for fixes in the Affordable Care Act. If they're willing to engage us on that, we're all ears, and we have ideas of our own that we would like to offer. But they've got to take it. They've got to not operate, as I unfortunately heard Speaker Ryan mention the other day, on the assumption that they should not work with Democrats. I was really surprised to see the Speaker's comment when President Trump indicated that he may have to work with Democrats, that the president ought not do that. Look, the American people are sick of this. They want us to solve problems. They want Democrats and Republicans, even though we have differences, to try to work those differences out. And that's not going to happen if the Republicans keep going off into their corner and come up with another plan and never really consult with us, never work with us. We're not going to find a solution if that's the approach they take. We're open to it. We're ready, willing, and able to offer our ideas.
Maybe not Paul Ryan, but other members of Congress, in terms of a compromise bill, should be on getting Michigan into the Final Four. That would probably be a better one. Go Blue. Thank you so much, Congressman Dan Kildee.
Go Blue, that's right.
I had to work that in. Since it is the weekend, appreciate it, my friend. Staying on the Russia investigation, the questions around that, Molly McHugh, former advisor to Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili, joins us right now. And thanks for being with us. I always appreciate speaking with you, Molly. There are several silos to be looked at when we're looking at what is happening on the Hill and the questions in front of us. There is, how is Russia involved in affecting how this government operates, its effect on the election itself, any connection with the Trump administration, with potentially what was happening in that influence over the election. Those three silos, you understand not only the technical but also the political here, Molly. What are you watching?
Well, I think it was a really interesting week in terms of developments. I think there was a lot of sort of breaking news stories. I think the information coming out of the Senate hearings were also very helpful to hear. But I think what you're starting to see is that there is this pattern that we can't deny. And I think we get caught up in the who did what in Washington side. And it's important for us to understand what this means for Russia. And this is part of a pattern of operations, of tactics and operations that they've used across Europe and other places to build influence, to sort of build how they operate in information and other ways. And it's something we need to pay attention to. I think it's really important for, you look at the freaking out of the Russia nerds over what's going on, and you really heard that in some of the Senate hearings. And it's because there is this new method of subversion that the Kremlin seems to have perfected, which is essentially tantamount to the hacking of people, where you have all these discussions about hacking and leaks and and disinformation, and it's not really the point. It's that there is a sophisticated information architecture that the Kremlin has built to use in the United States and in other countries, and in order to use that, you need really good data and really good targeting of information, and they clearly were using that in the U.S. before the election in some connection to the Trump campaign, knowingly or not. And that is really important for us to look at and to understand, because it is, since 2012, there's been evidence that the Kremlin has been using this. They sort of started trying to use this kind of voter turnout effort in Georgia in 2012, but they've gotten much better at it, and they're using it in the United States, and that architecture is still there, and they're still using it.
Yeah, and you are well versed on the very technical level of what this sort of espionage might be, this counterintelligence question that we're going through right now. You're sitting on either the Senate Intel Committee, or you're sitting now on that committee with members Nunes and Schiff. What's the question you want answered specific that will help us move forward in these questions that we have?
I think the real question is, what kind of communication was there between Russian officials and members of the Trump campaign during and after the campaign? I think part of it is going to be information, part of it is going to be money, part of it is going to be data, but there's clearly a web of relationships and ties that has not been well sort of deconstructed yet or understood, but understanding how this was used and knowingly used before the election to target American voters is very important.
What do you make of NSA Director Mike Flynn and the decision that was made, at least initially, because this could always change over time, everything does, but initially that he was not granted, in this case, the ability to testify with immunity?
I think it's very hard at this stage in the investigation to give any of the sort of big names that people are focusing on immunity, not knowing what there is or what any of it means. If Flynn has good lawyers and he actually has a case to make that he saw things that he shouldn't have seen but was not willingly a participant, then he'll be able to communicate that to the committee. I think he has a big challenge because of all the information that has come out about the money that he's taken and the lack of filing as a foreign agent and violation of the rules in the past few months. That is very difficult for him at this point, because the credibility of the source of the information is something that will be accounted for. That being said, I'm sure that he does have information that people are very interested in terms of what happened before and during the election.
The question is for what? What is the trade, right?
Exactly.
If you were to give immunity. I want to go back with something you intimated, and that is this question of the way Russia is being used as an idea. And a Russian ambassador, for instance, Dmitry Peskov, saying there is no evidence implicating Russia in last year's election, and that it is a slander to suggest otherwise. But there's also the extreme, which you've heard from other Russia experts, saying we have to be careful in the way that we do discuss Russia as an entity specifically, as being this fall guy in the discussion moving forward. But we do have at least reports that are counter-narrative to what the Russian ambassador is saying.
Right. I mean, look, you had high-level denials this week from the Kremlin, from both Putin and from Peskov.
Right.
You had this, we had nothing to do with it.
Right.
And the important thing to understand is when the Kremlin denies something, the higher the level at which they deny it, the more likely it is to be true. And the fact that you had Putin devoting 3 minutes of a speech to sort of talking about how this is absolutely absurd means that they're really nervous about this. But I do think there was, good points made in the hearings this week that essentially you don't want to make Russia this 10-foot-tall giant in the room.
Right.
That's absolutely right. But we also need to understand how they are operating, and Clint Watts really focused well on this in the hearing, how it is that they are operating with less money, with less resources, with less technology, and still doing better than we are in terms of intelligence and using these tools and tactics against us. And that's really important to understand. They don't operate with the rules that we do. They don't operate in the same parameters and constraints that we do. They will use hackers. They will use criminals. They will use criminal means to get information and use it, and tactics as well. And that puts us at a disadvantage, and we really need to think about how we are looking at this, how we evaluate it, how we are willing to accept the truth of what they are doing, and then what we can do to counter it. And we're still really at stage, 0.5 maybe in figuring out what they did.
I was so hoping you weren't going to say that, Molly McHugh, but I knew you were going to put it in the timeline for me. Always a pleasure. Your deep, thoughtful perspective. Very good stuff. Thank you so much, Molly.
Thank you.
All right. Now, as the Russian Flynn probe does continue at 0.5, if that's the stage where we're at. The man in charge of the investigation, Devin Nunes, is playing defense amidst concerns over information that he may have shared with the president. More on that.
Understand those criticisms?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but it always goes back to then who else is going to do it? Because there's only so many, at the end of the day, someone has to do it. I'm sure that all the Republicans in Congress voted for President Trump. All the Democrats voted for Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's just how it is. But at the end of the day, we're accountable to our voters. And like I said, this whole issue that we briefed the president on, that I briefed the president on, had nothing to do with Russia.
All right, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes on the calls for him to step down as head of the Russian investigation in the House. Joining me now is Kelly Jane Torrance, Deputy Managing Editor at the Weekly Standard, John Stanton, Senior National Correspondent for BuzzFeed News. Always great having you both. Kelly, starting with you. If it isn't Nunes, who should it be then? Let's try to answer that question.
Well, that's a good question, and it's a bit of a tough one to answer. Of course, Nunes is part of the so-called Gang of Eight, which is the 8 people in Congress that have access to the highest levels of intelligence. And those people are the leaders of both parties in the Senate, the House, and the leaders of both parties of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. So Nunes is one of those people. And the question is, if he knows that his committee is doing an investigation, why would he not share the information he received with the rest of the committee, especially the ranking member of the committee, and make it look like he is doing his job rather than making it look like he is trying to brief the White House before he has told his committee? I mean, it's the optics here. This is Washington, D.C., and to ignore the optics and not to do things totally by the book, it just seems to me it is a bit of a bad judgment from Nunes.
Yeah, and so far, and we look at this, Josh, building on what Kelly Jane is saying here on this, is that there is what is protocol, and there is that which is legal and illegal. And so far, the Republicans are saying this is not to protocol necessarily, but this is not illegal. And so as we look at then the non-protocol following process that he is undertaking, has he lost the confidence yet of the? Has he lost the confidence of the White House? Has he lost the confidence of the Speaker? Josh?
I don't think he's lost the confidence of the White House or of the Speaker, no, but I think he's lost certainly the confidence of Democrats. I think a lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate, and a fair amount of the public, frankly, look at this process and they say this is just not how this should be going, right? They think that at a minimum, if you look at the Senate's been able to sort of conduct investigations, this investigation, and look at this. No one is saying that Richard Burr shouldn't be in charge of an investigation of the White House on these issues. So that makes it even more sort of troubling, frankly, for him, because Nunes, in comparison to Burr, looks like at best he's sort of bumbled this a little bit, and that's going to really undermine anyone's confidence in him. But I mean, for the White House, I think it helps them a little bit, and the Speaker seems to have full support for him right now, so I don't think he's going anywhere.
And John, I did not mean Josh, I meant John. Even though I did call him Josh. But I'm sure I get a kid called Lou all the time, but it's Louie. Kelly, on that note, it does. Kelly, on that note that John's bringing up here, when we look at the Senate, and I asked again Representative Kildee, did he lose confidence in his own in the House's investigation, and is he now looking at the Senate for what might be the true closest to an independent investigation into those big questions about the Russia connection question? Are we there? Is that basically where it's going to end up, Kelly?
Well, I think it's very telling that we've heard about, of course, General Flynn asking for immunity, and we heard first that the Senate Intelligence Committee made their decision that right now they are not going to offer it to him. And I find that telling that we're hearing from the Senate Intelligence Committee before the House. And, you're right. Let's face it, nobody has any complaints about the way that Senators Burr and Warner, the ranking member, they seem to be working together just fine, as it should be. They're serious guys, a Republican, a Democrat, working together, trying to find out the truth. And I think that Nunes, by sort of fumbling this, as John said, he really has hurt himself. And I mean, he could come back from it. And I think inviting Representative Schiff to the White House to see that same information helps. But we're talking now about how he got that information and what he did with it, rather than the information itself.
His run for the White House. Now her role as one of his closest advisors is official. She was named special assistant to the president this week. She will not take a salary, but as a federal employee, she, like her husband, Jared Kushner, will abide by federal ethics regulations. The federal government has ruled against nepotism, but Justice Department lawyers have concluded that President Trump is not violating them. For more on this, I'm joined by Noah Bookbinder, Executive Director of the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Noah, welcome. So now that it's official, does that eliminate any concerns over Ivanka Trump's role in the White House?
It doesn't. It's an important step in the right direction that she became an actual government employee and that she now has to abide by ethics rules. That means that the Office of Government Ethics will be able to provide guidance. They'll be able to look at her financial arrangements. But there are a lot of concerns that still remain. She's still going to hold a significant ownership interest in her businesses. She's got an ownership interest in a good number of her father's businesses, including his hotel in Washington, and that creates a tremendous possibility for conflicts of interest and other problems.
What about the fact that she's not getting paid?
Well, the fact that she's not getting paid, probably, my sense is that they're looking at that as their way of getting around nepotism problems, as well as sort of problems with public perception in terms of the family sort of enriching themselves. But for ethics purposes, it doesn't really make a difference. She's a government employee. She's doing the work of a government employee. She is influencing policy, and you can't have her working in a way where she could be enriching herself in terms of her business interests, and the fact that she's not getting paid doesn't really change that.
We've actually seen other family members work in previous administrations. This is actually not the first time. Hillary Clinton, right, during her husband's presidency, the Kennedys worked side by side as well. How is this really any different?
Well, it's different in the sense that she is going to be a full-time presidential advisor with vast responsibilities across an array of issues. And so, I mean, in some ways, it probably is similar to the Robert Kennedy example. Robert Kennedy was Attorney General for his brother, and it was soon after that that Congress actually put the nepotism law in place, saying that you couldn't put relatives into a position working for you if you're in government. This administration is taking the position that that doesn't apply to the White House. They've gotten some sign-off from the Department of Justice on that. I'm not sure that that's the right view, but that's what they're saying, and that's what they've gotten an opinion to back. But it really does create the same kind of problem of, you want the best people in a position who are going to bring a diversity of backgrounds, and not giving people the power to essentially surround themselves with their family and make their family more powerful.
Well, I know. I mean, I feel like if it was up to most presidents, they probably would all choose to surround themselves with their family, because then they would be completely encircled and safe, right? They would have eyes and ears everywhere, but obviously you can't really do that. Ivanka Trump has sort of been seen as the voice of reason by many, especially during the election cycle. Do you think this could help temper President Trump?
There are ways in which perhaps it could, and to the extent that we've seen her views on issues, they've been more moderate than those of some of his other advisors. But there's a problem, which is that, one of the things that we're really concerned about with Donald Trump is that he could be influenced by his business interests. He could be making decisions because they help his businesses, they help his bottom line, rather than because they're in the interest of the American people and the country. When he surrounds himself with family members who have essentially the same business interests, the same financial interests, that magnifies the danger that he's going to make decisions because they help his hotel, because they help his foreign businesses, his tenants in Trump Tower. And when you have somebody else in a senior position, or in this case a couple of people, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, who have many of those same interests and could enrich themselves in the same ways, there's even more room for that to cloud their judgment.
Well, and also interesting to see some of the financial disclosures that were released earlier today. All right, Noah Bookbinder, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it. On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is set to vote on the nomination of Neil Gorsuch. That vote, expected to advance along party lines, it will then head to the Senate floor, where a number of Democrats are looking to put up a fight. Right now, 36 of them have said they will vote no on Gorsuch and support a filibuster. The latest lawmaker to add to her name to that list, Senator Claire McCaskill, a moderate Democrat from Missouri. If Democrats can secure 5 more votes, they could successfully filibuster that nomination. However, their challenge will likely be countered by Republicans who have threatened to use the nuclear option. So will they? That is the big question. Here with me now, Mike Morey, former communications director for Senator Chuck Schumer, and Susan Del Percio, a Republican strategist. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Great to be here. Susan, I'm going to start with you. So President Trump won Senator McCaskill's home state by double digits back in November. Since she's up for re-election in 2015, Republicans, they had hoped she would vote, 2018, excuse me, they had hoped she would vote in favor of Gorsuch. What does her no mean for Republicans here?
Well, it means that she's more concerned about her left flank in a potential primary than she is about probably winning her state in re-election. Right now, that's the most immediate concern. I really hope that the Democrats do not filibuster. While it looks like they may, the 60-roll vote is very important, and just when you have a nominee that is eminently qualified. You may not like it, but the fact is that Donald Trump won. And when a president puts up a qualified candidate for the Supreme Court, they really are entitled. When you know that he's going to be endorsed one way or the other, it's a shame that they go that route. And just for full disclosure, I believe that Justice Garland should have had a vote on this for his place on the Supreme Court.
Why fight this fight? This is a Scalia seat. This is a conservative seat.
Sure.
What about when there's a liberal seat?
Sure.
That's up for grabs.
Well, let's remember the 60-vote threshold is designed and exists for Supreme Court justices so that we can get consensus, at least get towards consensus on both the left and the right. The fact is 60 votes is there because you shouldn't have a nominee who is unable to actually secure support from anyone who is right of center. You should be able to find someone on the other side of the aisle who can say, you know what, this justice is someone that we could see on the court. And what Gorsuch has shown us is that unlike the Trump rhetoric during the campaign around sort of looking out for the forgotten man, the working man, the people who Washington hasn't been paying attention to, this is a judge whose record has shown that when it comes to corporate interests versus the little guy, he always sides with the corporate interests. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, both from Trump's sort of message about who he's looking out for, and as well as from the ability to actually generate some sort of consensus in the Senate. Look, what winds up happening in cases like this, as has historically, is if you can't get the 60 votes, then you don't change the rules, you change the nominee. Find a judge, nominate a judge who can get Democratic support.
That would be great if we lived in that world in that time. Not too long ago, actually, when we saw President Obama put up his Supreme Court justice, which many Republicans had big problems with, but they understood it's the president's choice. We don't live in that world right now. The fact is that this country is so divided, politics are so isolated, where it's going to be so hard to get to a 60 count vote on any issue, and that this, if any, should be the one when you have a qualified person. Just because you don't like his politics doesn't mean that his qualifications aren't there. And there's been no one to say that Judge Gorsuch does not have the qualifications and shouldn't be a member of the Supreme Court.
But you say change the nominee. But what about the argument out there? You know, we're hearing from Democrats, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Manchin, for instance. They're all saying, look, you change the nominee, we might get a more conservative nominee behind Gorsuch.
Well, if that's the case, then you're not going to get 60 votes again. The bottom line is you've got to build consensus in the Senate. I mean, at the end of the day, Gorsuch has had committee votes. He's had hearings. He got to testify. That never happened with Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland never got so much as an opportunity to sit before a bunch of senators in front of the American public. Now, he was a consensus candidate. He was someone that was chosen largely because of his record in securing Republican votes for his lower court appointments. So the notion that sort of Democrats, by holding a standard, the 60-vote standard, which is designed to build consensus, allowing, he's had his hearing. He's had his hearing. He's going to have a cloture vote. And a cloture vote is designed in order to determine whether there is broad-based support for this nominee. The Democrats have allowed this guy to come 10 times further than Merrick Garland had ever been able to come. And so if you cannot get those 60 votes, then find a nominee who can build consensus.
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, No Republican. Donald Trump is never going to put a justice up that will get consensus from the left. That will be nearly impossible. There's no question about that. And while, yes, Judge Garland should have had certainly at least very much a hearing, the Democrats shouldn't make the same mistakes that the Republicans did. Now, what concerns me is that the Republicans, before this last go-around where we now have all the seats, we have the Senate, we have the House, we have the President, were in fact the party of no, and that the Democrats are trying to follow that lead. It wasn't good government. It's still not good government.
I just quickly want this reaction from both of you. Is this about the seat, or is this about Merrick Garland? You think?
Oh, I think that this is it's more about left challenges on the left for many senators.
I think it's about both. I think it's about both.
All right, thank you to you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead, the calendar says April, but there's still some March Madness.